lot of times it's kind of a scarcity mentality in that I've got to hang on to this thing. One thing that a lot of people struggle with at different times is their money mindset. We all grow up with a certain way to think about money. And a lot of times it's kind of a scarcity mentality in that I've got to hang on to this thing.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Wealth Unfiltered. I'm Samantha Parinello, your host, and today I have an incredible guest for you all. We're going to be talking about how to scale your company and really how to move your mindset for that scaling. So to welcome to the show, I have Gordon Brewer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm so glad to be here, Samantha. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I think you're going to add a ton of value for our listeners. We have lots of entrepreneurs, business owners, and people trying to scale their company. And so this should be a very impactful episode for our listeners. But I would like to start with you kind of talking a bit about what Psychcraft is and how was it born?
Yes. I'm a therapist, and the Psychcraft network that I started, and also my podcast, which is called The Practice of Therapy. Really, the network got born out of my podcast and just having contact with a lot of colleagues that also had podcasts that address really kind of the business side of running a private practice as a therapist. We get lots of great training on the therapeutic side, clinical side of things, but most people that go into private practice, we've had little or no business training or knowledge in graduate school that teaches us any of those skills. So the Practice of Therapy podcast that I started in 2017, which is hard to believe, was really a need or a desire to help people understand the business side of running a private practice. And so the network kind of grew out of that, of other podcasts that address similar topics, either both clinical or self-help, those kinds of things. And so that's how all that got started.
That's incredible. So how long after the podcast was Psychcraft created?
I created Psychcraft in 2022. So
Okay. First of all, I want to touch on something you said because I think 100% you're accurate to the point that it actually extends way outside of just physicians and, therapists. Most people go into whatever their trade is, whether it's marketing, whether it's real estate, and very few people have business as part of what they've been taught, throughout college. So I think it's really important what you're doing and people being out there to learn the ins and outs of business and how to actually execute a business plan, putting in strategies, systems, steps, all of that's really, really important. And it's a part of our education system that's lacking, I think, as far as the trade world goes, unless you study business. But I would really love to understand a little bit more about your evolution for Psychcraft and the success of it now in the last 3.5 years.
Sure. So, when I started my podcast, it was really at the beginning of when podcasting was just starting to take off. So my timing was good in that sense. And, people ask me all the time, how have I made it successful? And really the answer is pretty simple in that I've just adopted a mentality of being persistent and consistent with it. And I think that's true in business and things that we try and things that we do. We need to think about it in terms of the long haul. There's really very few quick fixes, getting rich quick, so to speak, using that term. And so I think as much as anything, being persistent and consistent, but also making connections with people, a lot of networking and a lot of building relationships. I'm licensed as a marriage and family therapist, so that means that I'm sort of a relationship expert. At least that's what the letters mean. But anyway, I don't know if that's always true. But anyway, I think building those relationships and the ability to continue to network and make connections with people is really the bottom line to any sort of business being successful. We have to have other people. We have to have people that we can help. I'm a big fan of Donald Miller's The Story Brand, his book called Building a Story Brand. And so it's all about how do you make your customer or your client or whatever the hero of their story? How do you create a transition for them? And that's true whether you're selling a product or whether you're selling some sort of service, is being able to do that. So, kind of to answer your question, the success that I've had has been by just kind of following those principles. And also understanding your numbers is a real important thing. I know my listeners of my podcast really hear that from me all the time, is you've got to know your numbers and you've got to be able to understand the financial side of things. Hopefully I'm answering your question, Samantha, as I
Oh, you
kind
are.
of ramble on here. Yeah.
No, I love it. And I love that you're giving, a recommendation for a book. I think that's fantastic. And people need something tangible a lot of times, especially after listening to a podcast, to go to and have more insight and support. So I love that. I appreciate it. And you done my question.
Right, right. Yeah.
So I know that your focus is on helping, entrepreneurs, other business people just like you to really scale their companies. That's what you first talk about. And one of the things I noticed is that you talk about 3 phases. So you talk about the starting phase, then the growth phase, and then you have the actual scaling phase. And I think everyone knows what the starting phase is, but I'd love for you to kind of define the differences between the growth phase and the scaling phase.
Yes. So the way, at least the way I think about it is that, to back up a little bit, your starting phase should really be focused on, okay, what are the systems and processes I need to put in place to make this kind of machine work? And then just, within my particular field, profession, or whatever, your growth depends on the number of clients that you get, the number of customers that you get, to put it in that term. And so I think about growth in terms of building that customer base, that client base. But with a lot of professions, particularly in service professions, you eventually reach a kind of a ceiling. In other words, there's only so much time and so many hours in a day at which you can work with people individually or one on one in the therapy, at least in the therapy world. And so at that point, in order to grow anymore or to increase your income anymore, that's when you have to kind of switch to scaling. And when I think of scaling, it's some form of either going from the one to one way of providing services to the one to many way of providing services. And that could be done in any number of ways. Kind of the typical way for most therapists, and I think really anybody in kind of a profession or a service oriented business, is they start bringing on other people that are also providing the services under your umbrella. And so you benefit from the work that they do. And so in the therapy world, it's going from a solo practice to a group practice. And so that's a different way of creating income for yourself. And it's again going from the one to one way of providing services to the one to many way of providing services. And then there's a lot of other different ways that people could diversify their income streams, which it could also be considered scaling. They might have, for example, writing a book, or they might provide some sort of workshops or seminars or that sort of thing, or create a course that they want to promote or sell to people, or doing training other therapists in a particular method or a particular way of doing things. So there's lots of different ways that you can begin to scale, but it's really kind of, to answer your question, to me, growth is building your client base. Scaling is then moving from, once you've reached your kind of your limit on your client base, then you start bringing on other people and other ways to bring in income for yourself.
Fantastic. Well, that's a really great segue for me, because one of the questions I have for you is, somebody who's going from the growth phase to the scale phase, what is like one question they should either have answered or know for themselves before they take that step?
This is really simple, but I think as much as anything, and this is again something people have hear from me all the time, is understand your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And what is it that you're wanting to gain from that? What is the purpose behind what you're doing? And it might be increased income, it might be wanting to help more people. There's no wrong answer to that, but I think that's the one thing you do need to ask yourself when you begin to do any of this or even start a practice for that in that mode as well, is understand your why. And then use that as the place that you always come back to ground yourself.
Great advice. I think that's fantastic. As you've scaled, you have two companies really. So as you've scaled your podcast as well as SiteCraft, is there one system, I don't know, method that you've introduced to your own business to help you scale that's just changed everything?
Yeah, actually, I've got three businesses if I think about it, because I've got my group practice that I still run, which is a small group practice of therapists here in Kingsport. But I think as much as anything, the one thing that I think you've got to really be ready to do is to begin to outsource. I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs or as people going into business, in the beginning, we try to bootstrap and do all of it ourselves, but that is not sustainable in the long run. So I think as much as anything, you've got to be willing to outsource different things. There are any number of systems that you can put in place for things, but from my podcast and the SiteCraft network, a big part of what you need to be able to do is one simple thing is to build an email list to begin to collect the names of your client base. And that way, that's going to help you with your marketing and that sort of thing. And that's going to help you scale. There are just tons of different platforms and softwares and all of those things to keep you organized. But I would say pick one that you're comfortable with and just stick with it because they all do a lot of the same. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, just to, you made me think of another question here is so much has changed in the last probably 24 months with
absolutely.
AI and just all of the
Yes.
tech. Is there a resource that you either swear by or where you go to even find those things at this point? Because it's just ever evolving at this point.
Right, right. Well, you mentioned AI. Chat GPT has become a big friend for me because it just helps with so many different things. I would like to do this or that. What's the best way to do that? Put that into Chat GPT and it just spits out all this stuff. Copywriting, for example, if you're wanting to promote something or try to, for example, build a web page of some sort or something along those lines, it can absolutely save you so much time. I recently put together a new course for new therapists in working with the United Way in Louisville, Kentucky. And so I used AI to help me kind of construct the course and pull everything together. You put in a prompt and say, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want it to include. And this is what I want it to look like, all of that sort of thing. And boom, it puts it out there for you. And it's just amazing.
Absolutely. You've talked to probably hundreds in the last, since you started your company now almost 9 years ago, your podcast, you speak to so many different people. You've been helping so many people. So, what are maybe three of your top strategies that you keep coming back to that you find are some of the best advice that you can give those people or that you've gotten from those people?
Right, right. I would say, as much as anything, is don't try to do too much of it alone. I think as entrepreneurs, we want to go out and conquer the mountain and we want to, get all the glory and all of that sort of thing. But collaborating with others is just going to exponentially grow anything that you start. So having a good support community. For example, I've got a mastermind group that I meet with every other week, and it's other therapists and consultants that are at the same place that I am. And so having that community is one of the big things I would say to people and working with them and talking with them. And what I've learned from others is just have that group of trusted people that you can turn to and to be there for you as you go through the ups and downs of any sort of business or practice or that sort of thing. And, kind of backtracking to what I said earlier is really be prepared to outsource quicker. I mean, that's one mistake that I made is I didn't outsource quick enough. And so when learned to outsource and just pull in other people to do a lot of the stuff that was trying to do, that's what helped me grow. That's what helped me scale all of those kinds of things. I might have gotten sidetracked here, Samantha, but is that kind of what you're asking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about outsourcing, is there something in particular, like you thinking like bookkeeping or your marketing efforts, or what is it that you particularly found successful that helped you?
Yes. So one piece of advice I tell people all the time is those tasks or those things that you know you need to do for your business, the ones that you enjoy the least, outsource those. So, if you hate bookkeeping, if you don't like doing that kind of thing, definitely find a good bookkeeper to outsource to. Certainly the marketing and the social media and all of that sort of thing. If you enjoy doing that thing, keep doing it. But if you don't enjoy doing it, that's a good thing to outsource. Also, being able to recognize your own areas of expertise. One of the things, shout out to my assistant, Rachel, I'll let her handle all the marketing and all of the social media stuff because she is brilliant with that. And even if I sat down today and took a crash course and all of that, I still couldn't do it as well as she could do it. Plus, she enjoys doing it. I don't so much. So that's a good thing to outsource in those places. Or a business owner is really your job is to be kind of the creator of things or the creative person in it. And then the individual task that you kind of the nuts and bolts and all of that sort of thing, outsource that.
Are you looking to build sustainable wealth and achieve financial freedom? Viking Capital can help you do just that through multifamily investing. With a team of seasoned real estate experts, Viking Capital conducts deep financial analysis and data-driven asset management to deliver outstanding returns. Their strategy focuses on low-risk opportunities with significant value-add potential, preserving your capital while maximizing long-term growth. Join them and be part of a success story. Viking Capital has acquired 30 properties and manages over 6,000 units, all thanks to their dedicated team and valued investors. Discover their current deal offerings at vikingmultifamily.com and start your journey to financial freedom today.
You are a therapist. So one thing I really want to touch on is mindset, right? So there's probably got to be a very specific mindset that you need to have as you grow your company. There's probably some, I would say, like belief systems that might need to be broken. So can you touch a little bit on some of that for me?
Sure, sure. I think a big part of it is one thing that a lot of people struggle with at different times is their money mindset. We all grow up with a certain way to think about money. And a lot of times it's kind of a scarcity mentality in that I've got to hang on to this thing, and they hold back in investing and really understanding about things like ROI, return on investment, that sort of thing. A simple example in my own world when working with therapists is that one of the best tools for marketing, particularly in the starting phases for any therapist, is to get their name listed in the Psychology Today directory, which is they do a great job of just with SEO, search engine optimization, all of that kind of thing. And so it costs $30 a month, which doesn't seem like a lot, but there's a lot of therapists that balk at that because of their money mindset. It's kind of like, oh, I don't want to spend that every month. But the truth of the matter is it absolutely pays for itself. I mean, if you get one client from that, it's paid for yourself. So being able to think about it in that way. The other thing too is just imposter syndrome. A lot of people struggle with that. We're real quick to compare ourselves to others. One thing I say to people all the time is don't compare your starting point to someone else's middle point because they also started at the starting point as well. And
Right.
so being able to give yourself some grace around that and recognize that, okay, you're going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes. And just treat those as kind of, okay, what did I learn from this? What do I want to do different next time? And so not beating yourself up so much over those things.
I have several questions that go from that,
Mhm.
but I can say the first thing
Uh-huh.
is that you mentioned, the scarcity and the money mindset being a big piece to it. So when you talk to people and you hear them have some of this type of scarcity mindset or aren't sure about, marketing dollars or what they're doing, How do you help them go from like shift the mindset from fear to deliberate action?
To talk about money is an emotional issue. I mean, I'm putting my therapist app on that. I think it's tied to our security. It's tied to, our lifestyle. It's tied to everything that we do in our day to day kind of thing. For better or for worse, we have to have money to do things. And so I think a good, important mind shift is not to look at money as so much of a possession, something that you but something that you can use as a tool, and just thinking about money in that way. Okay, I want to do these specific things. How do I use money, or how do I leverage money to help me do those things? And again, kind of repeating myself, is to get more of an investment mentality with your money rather than a scarcity mentality. In other words, if I spend money on this, then it's gone.
Right.
Well, no, if you invest it, it's going to grow. It's going to continue to reproduce itself. And so I think a healthier way to think about it.
100%. I think you nailed it with that response. So I want to discuss a little bit about your company again and kind of shift back to that. So you've obviously had success and you're continuing to grow all three of your companies that you have. If you look back, at the last 7 to 10 years of the growth trajectory, I'm sure there's been some mistakes that have been made, as all of us who have our own companies can, I think, vouch for. Is there one in particular you look at and you wish that you would have known then that could have saved you a lot of grief?
Well, yes, and I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but I wish I had outsourced sooner. This is a common one that comes up for a lot of folks in the therapy world. I'm going to give a shout out here to my good friend Julie Harris, who owns Green Oak Accounting and wrote the book Profit First for Therapists, piggybacking on Mike Michalowicz's book Profit First, which recommend definitely. Another book that I highly recommend is Mike Michalowicz's book, Profit First. To me, it's a go-to primer for anyone in business. Anyway, one of the things that specific mistakes that I made, and Julie kind of quotes me in her book on this, is that I was paying my therapist in my group practice too much. And it came from a place of just wanting to be generous, wanting to give them good opportunity and that sort of thing. But what I was paying them wasn't based on what the numbers were. It was just a random kind of thing. And so going full circle back to the importance of knowing your numbers and understanding, things like overhead, what is it going to cost you, all of those kinds of things. And also just keeping that understanding in there rather than just making a random decision about stuff, is to really know your numbers and really kind of dissect that is one thing that's real important along the way. That was one of the big mistakes I made in my private practice along the way. Maybe some other mistakes that I've made is trying to maybe grow too fast, trying to take on too much. And it's better to do one or two things really well than to try to do everything for everyone. That goes back to the importance of creating a niche for yourself and just really being able to focus on a specific problem or a specific issue that you can really be a good expert in.
Absolutely. I love that advice. I think that speaks to everyone who owns a business, really, because I think we all have these big aspirations, and the faster we can get there, in our minds, the better. But if you're doing everything mediocre instead of, like you said, as an expert or as the top person in your field, then you're no longer as valuable as you should be, and you're actually diminishing the work that you're doing. So I think it's extremely, extremely valid and great advice that you just gave us and our listeners.
Yeah. One thing I'll interject there, Samantha, and I learned this from a client of mine, one of my therapy clients, who was actually a real estate investor. One of the things that is much more manageable for people, and also goes back to this persistence and consistency, is that having small incremental growth is much more sustainable than trying to have this big blowout kind of growth, because it's this big windfall. But this particular person would invest in inexpensive properties and not try to turn this huge profit when he would flip the houses or resell them or whatever. He's just looking at small, steady growth, and then he could take that money and then reinvest it. And so, and he's been very successful over the years and is now, probably a multimillionaire. So, I mean, just by doing those small, consistent, small steps along the way.
Yeah. Great example of it, because that just shows that you're not only helping therapists, you're really helping business people, entrepreneurs who all, it all comes back to the same fundamentals. So we talked a little bit about, multiple times about outsourcing, but what that truly means to me is growth, right? So growing your company, the size of your company. And if you're a solopreneur and your life has been doing it all yourself, I think there's two questions here. One is, how did you or do you recommend people finding those right humans and the right people to fit in those seats that you need? But then also, how do you change your mindset to trust? Because that whole time you've been like doing it all and you probably have a lot of control. So giving up that control is a big piece for a lot of us business owners.
Right, right. Well, I think as much as anything is being able to sit with the fact that no, nobody else is going to do it like you do it. And if you hand off anything to somebody else, they are going to do it a little differently than you do. Now, you can certainly train them and say, okay, this is how I prefer you do this. What I've learned along the way is that by handing it off to someone, it's pretty likely they might even do it better than you do it, even though you might think you can do it the best way. Being able to let go of some of those things, particularly the things that you just don't enjoy doing. Here's an example from my own world, and this is when I do consulting with people. This is one of the first kind of low hanging fruits I give them, particularly with solo practitioners or even group practitioners. They do so much of it in the beginning. They're answering the phone calls, they're setting the appointments, all of those kinds of things, and they're doing it themselves. And one of the lowest hanging fruits is to outsource having an intake coordinator, having someone that answers the calls, sets the appointments, that sort of thing. No, they're not going to talk to a potential client in the same way you do because you're a therapist and you have that therapeutic kind of way of doing things. But that is still not a great use of your time. If you're spending your time setting appointments and doing all of that and doing all the admin stuff, the way you make your money is when you're actually doing therapy with people. And so it's better to pay somebody, say, $30 an hour to do that, and you make the $150, $200 an hour as a therapist. So, again, it's a good return on the investment if you think about it that way.
100%. One thing that I always preach in my coaching practice that I have is that you should always put all of your tasks and everything you do into a productivity pyramid. And are you using your time at the highest, most greatest use? And are you getting the highest ROI for the things that you're doing? And if you're doing administrative work, or if you're doing taxes, or you're doing things like that, those aren't generating you income, right? So you want to give those off to those other people. I think absolutely you are speaking so many truths and giving so much great advice to our listeners. So before I wrap things up and ask you your final question, I want to kind of tell you what I've taken from the conversation. So my biggest takeaways from you are that everyone needs to remember that, especially if you're in services, it's a relationship business. So not only the relationships you're building with your clients, but also the networks that you're creating. So I'd say that's probably the first takeaway. Right. Second takeaway I had was, don't wait too long to outsource, and make sure that you're getting rid of as many of the small tasks that you can and you're using your time most wisely. The third one that I would say, and I would say this is probably one of the better ones just because I think it's not spoken enough into the world, is that don't try to grow too fast. Don't outgrow yourself, outgrow your company. Let it grow with you, and don't do that at a disservice to yourself.
Right. Yeah.
So with those three takeaways, I would like to ask you to give our listeners one more piece of advice, because you have a lot to offer our listeners that I didn't talk about or that you didn't mention yet.
Right. So what came to mind for me, Samantha, is just thinking about urgency. I think a lot of times we create urgency for ourselves around things that aren't necessarily all that urgent. And it just creates a lot of anxiety for us and a lot of angst. One of the the things that I say to my therapy clients a lot is if we get, we really need to ground ourselves in the present moment and really look at what we really have control over. If we project ourselves too far into the future and do the whole, well, what if this happens or what if that happens, then that's a place of anxiety. And if we go do the opposite of that and look too far to the past, say, oh, I wish I would have, or I should have, or I could have, all of those kinds of things, that's kind of a place of depression and guilt. And so the most effective place we can live is in the present moment and really looking at, okay, what do I actually have control over? What is within my sphere of influence, within my sphere of control, all of those kinds of things. And it's important to remind ourselves of that to just stay grounded. And that also takes the urgency out of things. If we worry or create a lot of angst over things that are outside our control, we can't do anything. I think it's always a good idea to plan for the future and think ahead in those ways. But if we get preoccupied with that and just live there in our heads, we're not going to get anything done because it'll keep us stuck. The only thing we can do anything about is what's right in front of us.
I love that. What a great final piece of advice for our listeners. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So I'm going to take this moment to say thank you so much to all of our listeners. I hope this was helpful and insightful. And thank you very much, Gordon, for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for tuning into this episode. We truly appreciate your support. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share the podcast with your friends. Until next time.